Good morning and welcome to the Global Current. I'm Morgan Mount.
And I'm Bill Golva.
In news, the arrest of Uganda's leading opposition leader days before the country's presidential election.
North Korea tests a long-range missile. And NATO Wargames show Baltic vulnerability to Russian attack.
In analysis, U.S.-South Korean military cooperation and the Chinese response.
Then, the Global Current brings you a commentary on highlights from Cardinal Peter Turkson's address at Seton Hall.
Thanks for tuning in and enjoy the show. And now, Elin Du reports on the arrest of Uganda's leading opposition leader days before the presidential election.
Kizza Besigye, a leading candidate in Uganda's presidential elections, was arrested on Monday, February 15th, 3 days before the East African country's presidential elections. Kizza Besigye, once a close friend to the current president, Yoweri Museveni, now runs as the opposition party's candidate. After losing to Museveni during the 2011 election, Mr. Besigye staged anti-government demonstrations. During one demonstration, he was shot by the Kampala police and since that time has been detained twice. In October of 2011, he was placed under house arrest. Mr. Besigye spoke about his demonstration in an interview broadcasted on KTN News Kenya.
And we are determined to regain our rights. We are determined to regain our freedom in this country. Some of us may die, but the country will be free sooner or later.
Mr. Besigye was arrested around noon on Monday, February 15th, according to the New York Times. Mr. Besigye was holding a rally in the capital city of Kampala. Currently, no charges against Mr. Besigye has been announced. According to The Independent, Kampala police spokesman Patrick Oyango stated, "Police can confirm one person dead during the confusion today." Police used tear gas to disperse the demonstration. President Museveni took power in 1989 when the nation became a close ally to the United States. However, the New York Times reports that the Uganda government has drawn criticism from human rights groups for limiting freedoms of expression in the month leading up to the election. Last month, a local radio station was shut down after airing an interview with former Prime Minister Amama Mbabazi. This is Elaine Du from the Global Current.
Up next, Liam Scollins reports on North Korean missile tests.
On February 7th, North Korea's National Aerospace Development Administration launched a rocket into orbit in defiance of international sanctions. According to The Guardian, North Korea calls this rocket a satellite. However, the United Nations Security Council unanimously declared this launch a ballistic missile test. In a speech recorded by the BBC, United States Ambassador to the United Nations Samantha Power condemned the North's actions.
The accelerated development of North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile program poses a serious threat to international peace and security, to the peace and security not just of North Korea's neighbors, but the peace and security of the entire world.
Tensions between North Korea and its adversaries grew more severe after the reclusive nation conducted another illegal weapons test in January. Despite international condemnation, North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un stated that his country will continue to pursue both rocket and nuclear programs. Kim Jong-un also claims that the recent tests have been for defensive rather than offensive purposes. After the successful missile launch, Kim Jong-un and North Korea's military elite celebrated in a lavish televised party, according to the Washington Post. A report from CNBC states that South Korean officials decided to shut down the industrial complex in which over 120 South Korean companies employed around 55,000 North Korean workers after the North's repeated violation of international law and sanctions. The Kaesong Industrial Park was the last joint venture between the two Koreas. South Korea has appealed to China to rein in its rogue ally. Historically an ally of North Korea, China backed the United Nations Security Council's resolution to pass harsher sanctions against the North. Despite China's support of the Security Council's resolution, it has maintained a desire to peacefully resolve the Korean conflict. Seoul has also aligned itself with the United States. In an interview given to the BBC, South Korean defense official Ryu Jun-sung stated that the country is seeking to obtain American-made terminal high-altitude area defense missiles to counter a potential North Korean strike. Although South Korea has stated that the THAAD missiles would only be used against a North Korean attack, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi claimed in a Reuters interview that, quote, "The development of the THAAD system is not just to defend South Korea, but a wider agenda and may even serve the possibility of targeting China," end quote. The increasingly hostile struggle between the two Koreas seems to be reaching a boiling point as South Korea and its allies redouble their sanctions and North Korea intensifies its arms programs. This is Liam Scollins reporting for the Global Current.
Next this morning, Josh Siegel reports on NATO Wargames showing Baltic vulnerability to Russian attack.
One could go as far as to say that we have slid back to a new Cold War, Dmitry Medvedev recently suggested during the Munich Security Conference. With Russian provocations in Ukraine and Syria and the continuation of Western sanctions and ongoing threats levied by both sides, relations between Russia and the Western world have achieved a level of hostility not seen since the days of the Cold War. NATO U.S. General Philip Breedlove, NATO Commander for Europe, remarks can be heard here.
We in NATO do not want to see a Cold War. We do not talk about it. It is not what we want to happen or anticipate happening. We're a defensive alliance who are arraying ourselves to face a challenge, and we see. That challenge is a nation that has once again decided that it will use force to change internationally recognized borders. And so we take those appropriate actions to be able to assure, defend, and deter.
While the world contends with the immediate ramifications of actual threats, military scholars and academics have recently concerned themselves with more hypothetical consequences. The RAND Corporation, in recent cooperation with U.S. military officials, conducted mock wargames involving a simulation of a Russian invasion of the Baltic states and NATO's immediate reaction. The report concluded, as currently postured, NATO cannot successfully defend the territory of its most exposed members, according to Foreign Policy magazine. As RAND reported, a heavily outnumbered and insufficiently armed NATO will be incapable of resisting Russia's momentum, with the report concluding that within a window of 36 to 60 hours, Russian forces will have advanced on the capitals of Estonia and Latvia. The report comes on the heels of continued concern among senior military officers who have expressed concern about the United States' gradual withdrawal of heavy armored brigades from Europe and the decline of contributions among NATO allies. U.S. European Command under General Breedlove recently released an updated strategy calling for permanent presence rather than the recent shift to rotational forces. The United States has committed to Eastern European allies and quadrupled America's military expenditure for military exercises and deterrence capabilities aimed at Russia. While the United States has begun to respond to concerns about its deterrence capabilities, European allies have been slower to adopt more robust defense initiatives. Much of Europe has abandoned or downsized their commitment. In 2015, only 5 countries spent 2% of their GDP on defense, NATO's prescribed spending objective. The United States, Poland, Great Britain, Greece, and Estonia were among the top spenders, with the United States contributing 75% of total NATO spending. Despite fear and concern regarding potential Russian aggression, there are a multitude of reasons to doubt such an outcome. The presence of nuclear deterrence and the long-term ramifications are Russia's underlying weaknesses, the Cato Institute recently assessed. The cost would be far greater. Grabbing the Baltics likely would spur population exodus and trigger economic collapse. Launching a war without the convincing pretext present in the cases of Georgia and Ukraine might leave the Russian public angry over the retaliation to come. For the Global Current, I'm Joshua Siegel.
And now, Vaughn Rogers analyzes U.S.-South Korean military cooperation and the Chinese response.
South Korea and the United States have been allies since the Korean War in the 1950s, but the BBC reports that a new joint venture in strengthening South Korea's missile defense systems has China and Russia protesting. The Korean War was fought by China, Russia, and North Korea on one side, and the United States and South Korea on the other. While open conflict has been limited for decades, all parties have been angered by respective missile tests or demonstrations of military force. South Korea and the United States have been planning how to set up the advanced defense system, and, according to Reuters, discussions could begin as soon as next week. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi had this to say about the missile defense system and the countries involved.
We exchanged opinions on the THAAD system. China has expressed opposition to its deployment. We hope that related countries take cautious action.
Although cryptic, Wang is restating Chinese foreign policy, which focuses on peaceful development and working in harmony with other countries. The Chinese argument in this case is that the missile defense system will destabilize the balance of power in the region. While South Korea would adopt the U.S. missile technology, Wang expressed concern that the United States would be in a position to use the missile defense system, known as the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD, on China itself. Russia is in agreement, saying to the BBC that the system's radar could penetrate deep into their countries and will create a new arms race. In response, the United States has promised that the defense system is for South Korea's defense only, and in a press conference at the South Korean Ministry of National Defense, Major General Thomas Vandal, commander of the U.S. 8th Army, outlined the reasons why.
This was an alliance decision recommended by CFC Commander General Scaparrotti. We also have seen growing support for this voiced in the ROK on the issue of THAAD recently. To that end, it is time to move forward on this issue. We look forward to close consultation and coordination on THAAD, as well as dealing with the threats to peace and stability posed by the DPRK.
With the situation and its parameters in mind, let's play devil's advocate. North Korea recently has been testing long-range missiles and nuclear weapons, and the United States and the United Nations have condemned the tests, arguing that they are a threat to peace in the region. China's protests are the same behavior the United States and the UN expressed over the same issue. China has remained largely silent after the condemnations by the UN, and that silence could be seen as a tacit approval of North Korea's testing. Viewed from the Chinese perspective, North Korean missile or satellite testing and launches could be a way to reestablish the balance of power in Northeast Asia. The bottom line is that each patron country, China and the United States, will protect the interests of its Korean ally, providing them with technology to defend themselves or to respond to attacks if necessary, protesting when the other side does the same. This is Yvonne Rogers reporting for the Global Current.
Finally this morning, Emily Lividay comments on highlights from Cardinal Peter Turkson's address at Seton Hall.
Laudato Si is the second encyclical of Pope Francis written around the issue of climate change in the world today. Signed in June 2015, some believe this encyclical added to the momentum for the Paris Agreement, which came out of COP21. It is no secret Pope Francis is an advocate for treating the environment with more respect. His address to Congress during his U.S. visit in September 2015 revealed how much he values the environment and even mentioned his encyclical.
This common good also includes the earth, a central theme of the encyclical, which I recently wrote in order to enter into the dialogue with all people about our common home.
Climate change has been a concern of the Holy See for decades. This idea is nothing new, but how does Pope Francis's encyclical change or add to what the Church has said before? Has the plan to react to climate change evolved over the last centuries? What call to action does the Pope make, and who is expected to make changes? Cardinal Peter Codwell-Apia Turkson, president of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, had assisted in writing the encyclical Laudato Si. His Eminence visited Seton Hall on Monday, February 15th, to provide clarification about the encyclical. Before Laudato Si can be understood, it is important to first understand how the environment is defined. Cardinal Turkson takes a direct quote from Pope Francis to help us understand.
When we speak of the environment, what we really mean is a relationship existing between nature and society, which lives in it. Nature cannot be regarded as something separate from ourselves or as a mere setting in which we live. We are part of nature, included in it, and thus in constant interaction with it. Getting to the reasons why a given area is polluted requires a study of the workings of society, its economy, its behavior, and the way that it grasps reality and so forth. And so given the scale of change, it is no longer possible to find a specific discrete answer for each part of the problem. It is essential to seek comprehensive solutions that consider the interactions within natural systems themselves and with social systems.
People may be surprised to find out that the Church includes all people in its definition of the environment. Part of caring for a common home also means caring for each other. The encyclical is not completely focused on climate change, but how we treat ourselves, one another, and all other parts of nature. His Eminency outlines that a strategy to combat injustice to the environment is a collective effort and also has a lot to do with helping the poor.
Strategies for the solution, then, demand an integrated approach to combating poverty, restoring dignity today on the privileged, and at the same time protecting nature and everything in it.
This notion is nothing new. The encyclical draws inspiration from Saint Francis of Assisi, who lived in the 13th century. Paragraphs 10 through 12 in the encyclical are dedicated to Pope Francis, crediting Saint Francis's brilliant influence on nature. Cardinal Turkson also gives an overview of the encyclical and puts it into context of how people have responded and how we should respond, beginning with Chapter 1.
So Chapter 1, after a very big introduction, whose conclusion I would recommend that you read, because paragraph 14, 15, and 16, which conclude the introduction, has the Holy Father state what he is looking for. He addresses a challenge, makes an appeal, and expresses a hope that the appeal can be heeded too. He addresses a challenge about the current, economic, ecological crisis, then makes an appeal for ecological conversion, and then addresses the hope in the capacity of the human person to embrace and to change course and embrace a new style of life. These three paragraphs basically carry the logic of the presentation of the whole encyclical. A challenge of the situation, an appeal for our response, and a trust and hope that we're capable of changing course, and so saving and redeeming the situation. So after that introduction, the Pope begins with Chapter 1, so paragraph 16 to 61. What is happening to our common home? It provides a spiritual listening to the best scientific conclusions on environmental matters available today. The UN have put together 800 scientists, and the conclusion of their scientific research is what the Pope is referring to here. Our goal is not to amass information or to satisfy curiosity, but rather to become painfully aware, to dare to turn what is happening to the world into our own personal suffering. So to suffer with the world in everything that is happening to it. Extremely complex and urgent issues are addressed, some of them, such as climate change, and especially their causes, are the subject of heated debate. The aim of the encyclical is not to intervene in what is the responsibility of scientists, and even less to establish exactly in which way the determination of the deteriorating climate is to be handled. That the Holy Father agrees is the work of scientists, and it is their competence, not his. He refers to them as a way of illustrating the abusive use of our environment and what is happening to it. In the perspective of the encyclical and of the Church, it is sufficient to say that human activity is one of the factors that explain climate change. And with that, we have a serious moral responsibility to do everything in our power to reduce our footprint and to reverse the deterioration of the natural and social environment. Let me add that on this too, not all scientists are on board. Our office received visit from several scientists who came and said they think the Holy Father should be modest in his dependence on these 800 scientists. And they think that the result is still not conclusive enough that there's climate change. And still some will come and say the anthropogenic character of climate change is still to be disputed. Whether human beings are responsible for this is still something that is under discussion. In any case, the one thing that needs to be corrected is, as I had to do when I had to present this to the United Nations on the 29th of June last year, the Holy Father has now written an encyclical on climate change. The UN like to refer to this as an encyclical on climate change, and we needed to correct that. The Pope has now written an encyclical on climate change. He's written a social encyclical, which deals with the nature of human beings in society and the state of the world. So that correction is worth making.
The purpose of Chapter 1 is to make the world aware that we cannot continue on the path of destroying the environment for the sake of our own personal suffering and the suffering of the environment around us. Pope Francis has sufficient evidence from communicating with multiple scientists to say that human activity is a contributor to climate change. However, not all scientists agree with this stance. To avoid the controversial effects or detract from the meaning within Laudato Si, it is important to not think of it as an encyclical on climate change, but a social encyclical about lifestyle change for the betterment of the world, as Cardinal Turkson is sure to emphasize. Also of note is Chapter 5, which gives directions of what must be done for the purpose of motivation.
The second chapter of the encyclical, where paragraph 62 to 100, is a review of the riches of Judeo-Christian tradition about all in biblical texts, above all in biblical texts and theological reflection. This expresses the tremendous responsibility of human beings for creation, the intimate link between creatures, and the fact that the natural environment is a collective good, the patrimony of all humanity, and the responsibility of everyone. This again is very crucial. About this, Pope Benedict XVI says the book of nature is one. We don't have the book of nature about human beings and the book of nature about nature, but the book of nature is one. Human beings and creation, their nature, are intimately bound together and related. Paragraph 101 to 136 deals with the roots of the present situation so as to consider not only its symptoms but also its deepest causes. And one cause is a technocratic mentality that technology can fix it all. That technology has solutions for everything that happens to our environment and everything that happens to our world. So, this technocratic mentality, which perceives all of reality as an object that can be manipulated limitlessly, and which the economy globalizes, this is worth attention and notice. Other roots include modern anthropocentrism or relativism and the disrespect for life, all of which dehumanizes the human being and the nature which supports its life. Paragraph 14, which follows this then, drawing from the lessons of these technological challenges, begins now to lay a solution, as it were. Pope Francis wants to propose a solution in response to the above, and he comes up with the integral ecology as a way of drawing people's attention to the recognition that their own lives are closely related with creation, and they cannot value their life without valuing also creation out of which they're drawn. So integral ecology is that, and this expression itself has a long history. Time allowing, I'll draw attention to some of these. So it comprehends our unique place as human beings in the world and our relationship to our surroundings. The fifth chapter addresses what we can and must do to solve the problem. The Pope gets very practical. Gives several examples, some of it with reference to mystics and saints, like Teresa of Lisieux, Charles de Foucault, and all of those. So referring to some mystical experiences, but all of it is to encourage us and to motivate us to want to do something to help deal with the ecological situation. At the end of the day, he encourages and invites all of us to a new sense of ecological citizenship and the need to train people for that.
The encyclical has peaceful intentions, but has been met by some criticism, which Cardinal Turkson addresses.
People, so why are you all generous in wanting to listen to and discuss Laudato Si? So midway through Laudato Si, we find this question: what kind of world do we want to leave to those who come after us, to children who are now growing up, and yet those unborn? The Holy Father then continues, this question does not have to do with the environment alone and in isolation. The issue cannot be approached piecemeal. This leads us to ask ourselves about the meaning of existence and its value that are the basis of social life. And so what is the purpose of our existence? What is the purpose of our life in this world? Why are we here? And what is the goal of work and of all our efforts? And what need does the earth have of us? The Holy Father's deep questions arise from an observation that today the earth, our sister, is mistreated, abused, and lamented. Its groans join those of the world's forsaken and discarded. And Pope Francis invites us to listen, as you just heard him say in the video, to listen to them. He urges each one of us and everyone, individuals, families, local communities, nations, and international community, to an ecological conversion, according to the expression of St. John Paul II. Such a change of heart means to change direction by taking on the beauty and the responsibility of the task of caring for our community.
So it is not as much a matter of science that this encyclical is based on. It is based on an observation by the Pope himself that our Earth is being abused and mistreated. Pope Francis provides a prescription for this mistreatment to better our common home. Cardinal Turkson also elaborated on the extent to Laudato Si's influence throughout 2015, from the declaration of the Sustainable Development Goals in September to COP21 in December.
As things turned out as they turned out to be, Laudato Si came out the way that was likely to influence all of these. And for a few meetings that I myself attended, right on the 29th of June, as I said, at a high panel discussion in New York, there was the decision to have a presentation of Laudato Si. And that's why I made the correction about the Pope has not done an encyclical on climate change, but has done an encyclical on social or whatever type of thing. So that's one. Then this was followed by an event on the 2nd of July in Paris. The ecology advisor of François Hollande had organized a meeting in Paris about consciences for climate. And at that event also, everybody knows France and the separation between church and state. But François Hollande gets on the stage, and for 5 consecutive times, he keeps citing and quoting from Laudato Si and Laudato Si and Laudato Si. So, people have read the encyclical, and the likelihood that it affected them and all of that is real. The Vatican delegation that went to COP21, we went only with Laudato Si. And we hope that at least it will provide a moral pressure, moral impetus for the nations gathered over there to come to a consensus. So I will not say it did not influence people, but I can say to what extent.
Lastly, Cardinal Turkson provides some words of advice and encouragement for those who would like to join in the Pope's call to action. I'd say
just, you know yourself best, and the thing is this. I said I hate to be prescriptive because I don't, everything about living a decent Christian life is against laws being imposed from the outside. If Christianity is a religion of any sort that brings any changes, then everything must come from the heart. From the relationship that we develop with God, with the earth, and with one another, out of this comes the way we treat everything. So it's not a question of giving directives about do this or don't do this and don't do that. I'd say that develop a very healthy relationship with God and with one another, and out of that, you also find ways of healthily relating to all of these things around you. After all, at creation, God established only 3 relationships: with Him, among ourselves, and with the earth. So if there's justice on these 3 levels of relationship, we have justice with everything else around us, and that's what I will recommend.
2015 was a big year for changing the way climate change is viewed. Laudato Si was part of the dialogue on what to do about our environment. Instead of providing all the answers, Pope Francis provided a healthy mindset for all people of all nationalities and religions to follow in order to care for our common home. This is Emily Lividay for The Global Current.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of The Global Current. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. I'm Morgan Mount.
And I'm Bill Golba.
We'll see you next week.
The Global Current is brought to you by the School of Diplomacy and International Relations at Seton Hall University. Our executive producer is Alicia Sharabali. Our associate producer is Bill Golba. Our news editor is John Jadot, and our analysis editor is Blythe Brady. Our interview segment is produced by Emily Lividay. The Global Current theme song is Acid Jazz by Kevin MacLeod. You've been listening to The Global Current on WSOU 89.5 FM, Seton Hall's Pirate Radio.